Hello, I'm Unica Harrell, and today I will present to you my research study entitled Enigma, The Power of Resilience. It is a narrative case study on adult survivors of childhood physical abuse, sexual abuse, and poverty. I am honored to discuss this with you tonight. So back in the 1990s, the late 90s, Ferletti and some additional researchers from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention concluded that there was a direct correlation between adverse childhood experiences and early death. And adverse childhood experience includes things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, poverty, household dysfunction, living with a parent who has a mental illness. And so there's a direct correlation, according to Ferletti, regarding these types of traumas or living through these types of traumas. Additionally, current research details maladaptation, mental illness, and again, early death for adult survivors of childhood trauma such as these. Also, there is a lack of research on adult survivors of childhood physical abuse and sexual abuse taken from the survivor's perspective. So the research that we have, or the seminal research that we see, only details the deficits of adult survivors. So during a literature review, the Adverse Childhood Study was one of the largest studies. They interviewed over 1,700 adults who acknowledged or who revealed that they had gone through such trauma as children. It was one of the largest studies, and it was seminal, and we still use it today. And there additionally, other researchers, such as the ones listed on the screen, believe that there is an intergenerational transmission of child maltreatment. And so what this means is that if you are an abused child, you will grow up and abuse your children, and that cyclical, that pattern is cyclical, and it'll just continue. So your children's children and your children's children will grow up to abuse their children. And so there's just no stopping it, according to these researchers. And it goes as far back as Bandura in the social learning theory. So of course, as researchers, as physicians, you recommend interventions. And so therapy as an intervention was one of the most prevalent recommendations for children who had experienced this type of trauma. And so what I want to discuss is the intersectionality of physical abuse, sexual abuse, and poverty. And so when you provide or prescribe interventions that are not affordable to everyone, then what do we leave, or how do we help those who can't afford such interventions? And so what further research revealed, which is the basis of my study, is the resilience theory. And so when we look at the resilience theory, it states that there are protective factors that we can put into place to help children become adult survivors. And so I looked through the literature and I thought to myself, who talked to adult survivors? I was never interviewed. I know that there was a lack of research that specifically listened to those who survived, who lived through those traumas, who are well adapted, who obtain higher educational degrees, who are basically the enigmas to so much research. And I share a personal story. When I was in my undergrad degree, I was in an adolescent psychology class, and I listened to them tell me how I was less likely to now, of course, they didn't know they were talking to me, but I was less likely to graduate. I was more likely to attempt suicide. And so I sat there believing, like, what's the point? Why am I here? I'm part of that percentage that's not going to get the degree. And so I left class a number of times in tears. And so that was back in 2011. And so actually back in 1998. But so now it's always been a goal of mine to kind of look into, find others like me who survived such trauma and figure out what helped them survive. And so that brings me to the research question. And so my primary research question is, what experience do adult survivors of childhood physical abuse, sexual abuse, and poverty attribute to their perseverance? So this is from a non-deficit point of view. I wanted to speak to those survivors and not find out what they went through. I wanted to know, more importantly, how did they navigate it? How did they become successful? And so there was a certain criteria that they had to meet in order to participate in the study to help answer this question. And so additionally, there were sub-questions, and 3 sub-questions, because I began with a hypothesis, and I felt that, or I thought that religion would play a big factor. So of course, I wanted to know from these survivors, what role did religion play in building resilience? I also wanted to know, what role did school connectedness play, or, what part did school play, educators, if any, in assisting with them persevering? And lastly, the sub question is, what role did therapeutic interventions? It was recommended to me, it's recommended to most of us. So let's find out from those survivors, did it work? How did it go? And so the methodology, of course, is a qualitative study, which actually helps you understand the why. So we have the numbers, they're everywhere. We know about the maladaptations. And so I wanted to know why. And so a qualitative study was the best method of study for this type of research. I conducted one-on-one interviews with adult survivors who met criterion-based sampling, meaning you had to have experience, not just abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and lived in poverty, which turned out to be a little tricky in the end. But so there was criteria they had to meet, and we conducted one-on-one interviews. And so each of these interviews was an individual case study. So it was its own case study. So throughout the data analysis process, I conducted within case analysis. So after an interview, I went through that transcript and tied it to the research and a theoretical framework, which was the resilience theory. I use in vivo, that was fun, but I use in vivo data analysis software to find common themes and to see what thematic and what theme emerged from speaking to the survivors. And in this particular study, or in my study, there were 10 survivors that participated. So once I conducted the interviews and kind of did the within case analysis, I emailed the transcripts, and actually I emailed what I wrote up to present it in a dissertation. I emailed that to each participant to kind of tackle that whole validity, reliability. I wanted to make sure that I didn't interpret their story. I didn't let a researcher's bias kind of control or have a personal interpretation of what they said. So they were able to read what I said, see how it was tied to the research. And so what I found was there were 4 common themes, and the gears kind of show which one was most prevalent. We'll do that one last. So there were 4 common themes. There was parental resilience. Now, this was new to me. I'd never heard of it, but the participants described that what their parents went through, and we're talking heinous things, whether it was abuse from a spouse, cancer, surviving lupus, and they witnessed this as children and helped their parents navigate through it. And so they would describe it as, I saw my mother go through this, I knew I could do it. I saw what she lived through, so I knew I can do it. So parental resilience was one of those themes that kept reoccurring. Belief in a higher power, again, a shocker to me. I felt like religion was going to play a real role, but these particular participants did not believe in organized religion. However, they did have faith in an energy or a power or a source, whether it was love or just light. They believed in a higher power. And lastly, well, not lastly, penultimate, school connectedness. So each of these participants described taking on leadership roles in dance and band and Odyssey of the Mind, different clubs at school, participating in sports. And they described relationships with particular teachers that made them feel like they could do it. So school connectedness was huge as well. And finally, self-determination. 100% of the participants described self-determination, whether it was, I really don't know how to answer that question. I was just determined to live better, to do better, and to break the cycle. Those were actual words that were used. I was determined not to be a failure. I was determined not to stay on a downward spiral. And so those 4 common themes were prevalent throughout the entire research. So this led to implications. And specifically, I conducted this research to kind of focus on organizational change within our education system. And so I have the implications and recommendations that it has for school administrators. It's have, conduct, require, and encourage. You have to have your faculty and staff trained on adverse childhood experiences, especially when we're working in turnaround schools and we're looking to lead organizational change. So this should be conducted with high, SES schools and low performing schools as well. So all schools should conduct an ACE training where teachers become cognizant of the adverse childhood experience study. Conduct professional development surrounding importance of school connectedness to understand, help teachers understand and educators understand the value that they have in a child's life that may be going through some of the things that I went through. I believe that a requirement for a mindfulness class as an elective should be mandatory in every school. Encourage participation with your students with extracurricular activities and being part of the school, making that school-home connection. So for my educators, and I am a fellow educator, I'm an educator as well, but begin your class using mindfulness activities. Teach children how to self-regulate. And so this could be a matter of 60 seconds, but start your classes off with that to kind of get the edge off for the students. Participate in professional development, learn about ACE, learn about mindfulness activities, and build nurturing relationships with your students. Get to know them because sometimes you're all they have. Encourage, again, extracurricular activities and clubs. It's such a huge thing. And when we take this away from our students, that may be all that they have that's positive in their life. And so for my school counselors, this is a heavy lift, but for my school counselors, my DIACs and the support staff that are primarily responsible for students' academic and social needs, lead professional developments. I think that school counselors are being misused and they should lead that professional development on social emotional learning, learn about CASEL, learn about mindfulness things for students and teachers. So guide the implementation of weekly mindfulness activities. And this part is really important, because what I learned throughout my research, the pervasiveness of child abuse, the range is huge. I didn't expect to have a doctor. I didn't expect to speak to highly successful adults who slipped through the cracks. And what's most profound about this research, none of them told another adult. So they were not labeled, not all of them were labeled at risk. They were high SES, they were Caucasian, they were none of those things that would trigger you to give them this type of support. And so when I say all children, because you could miss some. I would have. So, and also I think that all counselors and support staff should hold, trained support staff should hold getting to know you sessions. And I think getting to know your students and figuring out what they need and what they have going at home will help create a level of comfort so that maybe they will come and talk to you and not do what the other adults in my study did. So I think these are huge implications and recommendations for you guys. So my distribution plan. So again, my target audience, as you know, were the three groups of people that I listed implications for. But I would love to distribute this research study information at a professional development at the beginning of the school year. When teachers come back, there's usually a big rally and a gathering of all personnel from the superintendent to the first year teacher. So I would love to present this information and conduct the ACEs studies at schools. This is, some of in the works. We'll talk about that. But district-wide back to school professional development and have breakout sessions and where everyone will learn their ACEs score. If they don't have one, it's still beneficial because reading the words or the questions that are in the ACE survey opens your eyes to know like these things happen. A TED Talk. I think I've talked about this since the first year. I'd love to do a TED Talk, things worth sharing. And I definitely think that understanding the adverse childhood experience study, the effective, how it affects us, but most importantly, how we do have enigmas and survivors that did not succumb to what they came through, and listen to their stories to know that if we put these in schools, the things that help these adult survivors will be more productive and we'll have more mentally well, I guess healthy kids, but focus on mental health, and definitely a larger scale research study. I was a little bit disappointed at the time. Just gets away from you. 56 people responded to my survey. And while I was looking for specifically people who had gone through, or participants who had gone through 3 things, I missed some because there were some who were sexually abused, but they were not also physically abused, or they did not live in poverty. So I didn't get to speak to them, and they are still survivors. They may have obtained an associate's degree and experience abuse, but only one type of abuse. So I would love to conduct a larger scale study. So there's definitely in a distribution plan to distribute more information and to conduct a larger research study. And so I'd like to conclude with the need to end child abuse. And until we do, until we eradicate it, because it's real and it happens, and until we can stop it, we have to teach children how to overcome and how to self-regulate and how to ask for help. And so until we can stop it, we have to figure out a way to deal with it. Thank you for your time and consideration. Again, I am Unica Harrell. Have a wonderful day.